Systems engaged. Frequencies synchronized. Prepare for incoming transmission. Coming to you from somewhere in the multiverse, this is Robots from Tomorrow. This show is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Music, and as always your podcatcher of choice. For the full archive featuring over 800 episodes of comics and comics-friendly content like interviews, book discussions, and freeform tomfoolery, please go to robotsfromtomorrow.net. Here is your host, Greg.
Hello everybody, welcome to Robots from Tomorrow. My name is Greg, thanks for joining us. Today's episode is my chat with cartoonist Hazel Newlevant about their new graphic novel, Queer and How We Got Here, A Personal History. It blends their journey of self-discovery with a growing understanding of the journey that queer identity has taken throughout history. And by sharing both journeys equally in such a clear and effective manner, Hazel has made a book that belongs in every library, bookstore, and home. So, you are in for a treat today. The rest of July and August are shaping up to be more bumper months of Robots content. In no particular order, there's a pretty good chance you'll be getting episodes about Chris Schweitzer and his new ongoing series Outlaw's Apprentice, Sierra Barnes in the next volume in her Hans Vogel is Dead series, Natasha Womack talking about Afrofuturism and how to look at the character of Miles Morales through that lens, Aditya Bidikar with a no-holds-barred, spoiler-filled exit interview to close out his debut miniseries In Your Skin, possibly with another member of the book's creative team, and critic, curator, raconteur Paul Gravett on, well, knowing Paul, probably everything in one form or another. So a lot of stuff to look forward to from this little alcove of the multiverse, but for now, sit back, relax, and enjoy my chat with cartoonist Hazel Newlevant. My guest today is a Brooklyn-based cartoonist known for creating and editing comics about polyamory, queer history, bisexuality, and reproductive rights. Their cartoonist CV highlights start off with the Xeric Grant-funded mini-comic CI VEDIAMO. How do you pronounce that? Can I get a line?
CI VEDIAMO.
CI VEDIAMO. Okay.
So you said it right, but you just have to say it with confidence. CI VEDIAMO. Well, it's Italian for no reason except that I thought
that's cool.
Would be add some mystique.
So that came out in 2012. We have the Prism Comics Grant-funded biography of Harlem Renaissance blues singer Gladis Bentley called If This Be Sin in 2013. At that point, they decided to branch out into anthology editing with 2016's CHAINMAIL BIKINI, awesome name, which collected experiences of female and non-binary gamers in a male-dominated space. The success of that led them to keep a foot in both worlds moving forward. The anthology side racked up co-editing titles like 2017's Comics for Choice, 2019's Puerto Rico Strong, and 2024's Becoming Who We Are, real stories about growing up trans. Back on the cartoonist side, they put out the 2017 graphic novella Sugartown and the 2019 graphic novel No Ivy League. This body of work over the first decade or so of their career, give or take, has earned them the Ignatz Award, the Eisner Award, and the GLAAD Media Award. But that is all prelude to their new book, released last month, which brings them here today. Queer and How We Got Here, A Personal History, blends the creator's personal history with their growing understanding of the larger landscape of queer identity that history is unfolding in. By sharing both parts of that journey equally in such a clear and effective narrative, cartoonist Hazel Newlevant has made a book that belongs in every library, bookstore, and home, and it is my pleasure to have them on the show to talk about it. Hazel, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for that kind and generous introduction. And we'll hopefully convince all of the bookstores and homes to add Queer and How We Got Here to their shelves, because it is a labor of immense love, immense work. Took me about 5 years. So it's really, really exciting for it to now be at the point where I can share it with people.
When you were first conceiving the book, which came first, the personal memoir side of it or the historical exploration?
It was always conceived as a combination. The book was actually conceived because my editor, Andrea Colvin, who was my editor on No Ivy League, and we have a working relationship going back a long time, she had just started being the head of comics at Little Brown Young Readers. And she approached me seeing that I was doing more comics on queer history. I did a short comic for the Nib called Queer Uprisings, which was
Mm.
about acts of collective queer resistance that happened
Mhm.
before the famous Stonewall Uprising. Things in a similar were not as well known. So she saw this comic online and said, Hazel, can
Mhm.
you pitch me something that is queer history with personal elements? And I said, absolutely, I can do that. That would kind of be the culmination of everything that I've made so far in my
Mhm.
career. I've never really done much fiction. I just find drawing on stuff that has happened to be a lot more instinctive. So pretty much all of my work is either researched history type of stuff.
Mhm.
So yeah, she came to the right person, and I spent about a year working on this pitch, just like fiddling with the outline, making sample pages. And yeah, so it came together something that it's about 50-50, I think, in
Mhm.
the page count. And I was a little concerned that people would be like, why? Why are you combining these things? But
Mhm.
I've been really happy that it seems like a lot of people instinctually get it and are interested in like in what I was trying to say, which is like the way that this history has set the
Mhm.
stage for my life.
Yeah. I think it was smart to start off with your history. The historical exploration is always tied into something that works narratively. So it's not like, hey, why am I reading a history about this stuff? It's all about Hazel, the character. You do a really good job of giving enough historical context to whatever personal moment without going down a rabbit hole. What was your guiding light in terms of feeling when you had reached the point of, okay, this does what it needs to do versus like, ooh, there's this other interesting thing I can put on here? What were some of those decisions?
That's a great question. Yeah, all of these historical subjects were selected, of course, because I was trying to understand what had bearing on certain incidents in my life.
Hmm.
I started out with a very detailed understanding of what's happened in my life and more of a broad overview understanding of US queer history. Like I read a few kind of surveys of the subject, but I certainly didn't know all of the stuff that I would go on to research and
Hmm.
find out. Like, for instance, when I write about learning about testosterone as an exogenous hormone and how that impacts people's development, and
Hmm.
do I perhaps want to do this? Then there's a corresponding history of testosterone as a medication and the discovery of hormones, which I think is a really interesting historical context because it creates a possibility for a whole new form of gendered embodiment, or new forms, I should say.
Hmm.
But also, hormone medications are mostly used by cisgender people. And I was interested to learn it's got the same name whether you are going through menopause or you're transitioning. Either way, it's called HRT, hormone replacement therapy. I
Hmm.
definitely dove into these subjects and kept finding out more and more that helped put my life in context, or
Hmm.
I kind of tried to include anything that would challenge a widely held assumption of a certain practice or norm being timeless, or even something like the idea of homosexual and heterosexual being
Hmm.
different diagnoses slash orientations, which is a pretty basic concept to how people think about sexuality now.
Hmm.
Has its own history. So I tried to like
Right.
historicize everything that I had previously taken as assumed,
Hmm.
and also highlight activists who I learned about who were making positive changes or cultural interventions that then I have benefited from, whether it's setting up the first birth control clinic, which there's a wavy line you can trace from there to like the sex positive feminism of the 2000s, which really defined the context of my teen years for sure. But yeah, the heuristic is trying to understand what shaped my life. So it is very US focused stuff, like interesting developments in queer culture that I can't really trace to like affecting my own cultural context. I didn't include them so much.
I mean, I think, consciously or subconsciously, whatever, you're tying the non-personal to the personal. That does help give you a bit of a barometer, just in that you're like, this wasn't part of my understanding at the time. Does it need to be in here? Because it really does feel like a personal history. I mean, half the book is like, we're almost watching your life, even like before Wikipedia, you're doing like, oh, this is a thing. Let me find out more about this. Certainly in the 21st century, we all have that impulse. And that humanizes it in a way.
Yeah, hopefully it also encourages readers to do their own deep dives on whatever subjects are relevant to them and to seek out their own historical contexts.
I want to talk about readers for a second, because I feel like this book is going to be read by at least 4 groups of readers. Queer readers who are searching, queer readers who are confident in their identities, hetero readers who are observers, and then hetero readers who are skeptical.
Interesting. I mean, that is definitely one way of breaking down the audience. I'm
and there may be more.
Interested that you didn't break it down by age, because that's another place where there's going to be a huge amount of variation.
That could very well
where people are at in their life experience. Like it could be read by, everybody from young teens to anybody who's alive. I actually, since you brought up some of my other work, I had a really sweet experience related to Becoming Who We Are, which is it's a middle grade focused anthology of stories about growing up trans, which has this explicit design for younger readers because the other editor is a parent who has a trans kid, and they were very much thinking about, what do I want to exist for my kid to read and for other people to understand my kid? But this book, I have a friend who does a lot of hospice care and works with a lot of people in nursing homes. And apparently she was giving Becoming Who We Are to older people who are more bigoted, and it helped them reconcile with younger family members who they didn't understand before. So readers 8 to 80, it's never too late. Yeah. So if this has some similar role in people's lives of helping people feel or be more understood, that's really important. A friend of my mom's who I even reference him in the book as being annoying by misgendering me, but he just read the book and he said, it's really good. And you should put a sticker on it saying, you don't have to be gay to read this book. It's like, thank you so much. That says a lot about his assumptions about a book with queer in the title, that it would need some kind of disclaimer. But it's true. It's true. You don't have to be gay to read it. And it covers a lot of stuff that is related to the straights, even of the history of hetero courtship and like the birth control movement. So
it is very wide ranging. You may have actually just covered this. Did you go into it with a particular reader in mind? Because it felt like you were almost aiming, this is the book 12-year-old Hazel should have had, and it would have saved them. It would have condensed a whole lot of stuff into one very powerful reading experience.
I would put it a bit older than 12. I mean, I'm sure 12-year-olds definitely read books for adults, so I'm sure people that young will be reading it and processing it. I guess I was imagining somebody
12 might have been
somebody
a
maybe
little.
like 16 to 18, because it like grapples with a lot of sexual issues. So
12 is
I
probably
feel
a little.
like readers who are maybe sexually active, you don't have to be sexually active to read this book, but I think that it would probably be even more valuable if somebody's dealing with that as well. Yeah, so I guess I did it for the precocious teens, and there's also a big element of talking about abusive relationships and dynamics of abuse, because that was unfortunately part of my life. And if I'm talking about like a journey, like my romantic journey and how I have felt about gender throughout my life, it's kind of inextricable. And I did actually have to push the publisher a little bit for this to be an element, because little brown young readers, just by the name of the imprint, they said it's got to be YA at the oldest. Which now the imprint, they have a separate one for comics called Little Brown Ink. So I don't know if that has a more expansive vision, but I knew that it had to be okay for teens, and that opens up the whole institutional market. So I understand why they want that for sales reasons, for something not to be unacceptable. But yeah, there was some concern about having a book for teens that involves a 19-year-old dating somebody twice their age.
Much older,
But it's so important because it's all about how it's a bad idea. And I really, really wanted for that to be available to young readers. And like, I really break it down as far as like behaviors that are controlling, that are not okay. And I was like, it's essential that this be in a book for teens, because I mean, I hear Gen Z and Gen Alpha are having less sex than us millennials were doing, but I still wanted to come at it as like, hey teens, like I thought this was cool and like transgressive, but in a fun and cool way.
Turns out not so
and
much.
You can tell me shit when I was 19, but let me share with you how this can all go so wrong and why it's not a good idea.
The use of yourself as like a case study,
It's a major element of what I wanted to get across to young readers. And the other major element, trying to impart just a broad understanding of how much everything is in flux and socially contested, and you know, so many things that we might take as default or inevitable are in fact hard won by these legacies of activism, and we're gonna need to win some of them again. That was a really sad part of working on the book, because I've been working on it since 2019, and a lot of bad shit has happened since then. So seeing the opportunities
roll back,
narrow in so many ways is very sad. But it continues to be necessary to at least attempt that inquiry of like, what were the social conditions that created certain opportunities in the first place. Not that I necessarily precisely understand them, but I have delved into them and explored them.
That's where combining the personal and the historical really pays off, because it gives you a through line through a lot of the history and a lot of different pieces of that puzzle. And it shows you that things that we thought were always the case weren't, that it is a 2 steps forward, 1 3/4 steps back, 2.5 steps forward, and has been for centuries, if not our entire existence. So it doesn't solve things, but it can be a solve.
A salve,
in some ways,
really
to
was
be
to
like,
me when I was researching it,
yeah,
which I started heavily working on it in 2020. Things have just been so unrelentingly wild since then, but it absolutely was a comfort to me to approach this longer scope of history and these longer struggles.
One of the things the book did that I wasn't expecting is it gave me enough context to actually feel that push and pull between the fluidity of identity and this like human need to categorize and simplify, and not just sort of understand it intellectually, but to see it play out in so many of these little historical things to really feel the weight of it. And my question was that a goal going in, or did it emerge from the structure you built?
Interesting. I guess I had a broad idea that nature versus nurture would be
Hmm.
a conflict in this, or I mean, I think the project of gay history, which from what I understand is a discipline that comes out of the gay liberation movement, like it
Hmm.
has an ideological project of finding these reflections of queerness and these experiences of queerness throughout time and throughout this longer history, which implicitly or explicitly contradicts people trying to frame it as a modern perversion, which
Hmm.
I think that has been a type of anti-queer bias, whenever you want to name it. It's the damn chemicals in the water or something.
Hmm.
But then everybody has to deal with the vagaries of putting these categorizations on
Hmm.
historical people or historical social movements or groupings that were not exactly analogous, like,
Yeah.
which historical figures do you want to call trans, stuff like that.
Hmm. Going through the book, you have it on both sides of that divide of having a question and then finding a container almost for it and be like, oh, I am this. And then you change and then other things change. And so it is so fluid in so many different directions. And the need, even just for society to function, there has to be a certain amount of categorizing. And even people with the best intentions can still have difficulty with that. So, in some ways, the expanse of all the historical stuff in here gives people enough of a broad picture to see, like, yeah, I'll say chaotic, but I mean, this has been, uh, there's a phrase in there, some sort of like quagmire, nightmare, or some sort of, oh
Oh
shoot, I wrote it
yeah,
down somewhere,
yeah.
but yeah,
That's something that my friend said to me
yeah.
about trying to understand.
So, yeah, the book is doing a
I mean,
lot
I think
of stuff.
just having uh, respect and empathy for people fundamentally, and a
Hmm.
desire to respect their self-determination and
Hmm.
let them do their own thing
Right.
sexually or gender expression wise. I think that always comes through, even if people do put their foot in their mouth. But yeah, I did want to impart an understanding of how how the categories and the category schemas have kept changing over the centuries, which I find validating, because it's like
Yeah.
identifying as non-binary and using that word for it is pretty new. But everything was new once,
Yeah.
and there's other ways of identifying that go out of vogue. Or
Hmm.
I guess I wanted to validate doing new things or identifying in new ways, because everything comes from somewhere, and it hasn't always been the same. Not only are male and female not immutable, but bisexual, straight, gay are not immutable. Transsexual, what that means is not immutable. It's all highly mutated.
Yeah.
So I have embraced that to give myself some license to not strictly fit with historical precedents or historical categories. And I want that for readers
Hmm.
too. And as you said, I personally have an experience of having really changed what I identify as. Like, I used to be bisexual, like fully authentically. That was not something that was just like a misguided label.
Hmm.
And now I'm not. And I'm transmasculine. And
Hmm.
was I always transmasculine? I don't know, maybe.
Yeah.
And it depends on how you think about these things. But
Right.
yeah, it's also not like a traditional, uncomplicated transition narrative, which is another reason that I wanted to put it out there, because
Right.
there's a certain trans life story that traditionally trans people have had to give to medical providers, whether it is true for them or not, because they were trying to fit a very narrow diagnostic category, which was intentionally very narrow to try and restrict the number of people transitioning, basically to protect the cissexual public from having to deal with the contradictions.
Let's talk about like creating the book as a work. Blue and orange.
Is it?
Why? What do those two colors give you?
Well,
themselves?
so the book is rendered in dark blue, like a navy blue, and hot pink and bright orange. And those are the three colors of actual ink in there. It's Pantone special color inks. It's not a CMYK blend, which was a whole finicky process to pick out the right Pantones. But after I did some line art, I experimented with different palettes, and I was like, I like this pink and blue limited palette. It reminds me of Risographed comics. It actually was very intentionally inspired by Risographed comics, which is a Risograph machine is like a photocopier, but you can put different, like, bright, bold colors of ink in it. So it has a lot of these kind of limited but bold type of palettes. And I had bright pink hair at the time, so that was an obvious color consideration of how I was going to render myself. So I started out pink and blue with the first autobiographical section that I did, and it makes it faster to color too, having a limited palette, because everything is just different opacities of these two inks with a few rare instances of layering. It was a little bit unpredictable how the layering was going to come out, so I mostly avoided having colors that were blends. And then I showed it to my roommates who I was living with at the time, and they had some great suggestions, including one of them said, what if you do a different color palette for the historical sections? And I was like, oh, great. That's how we get to the blue and orange, because the orange has approximately the same, I forget all the words that people use.
Like dynamic range?
It's like equally vivid or dark if you imagine the whole thing in grayscale. So it's a pretty good substitution. But I think the orange looks a little 70s, which is nice. And light colors of orange lend themselves well to having things be kind of sepia toned or like faded vapor. And the light colors of orange are better for a lot of skin tones. So that is how I landed on that. And then, it creates this visual distinction, whether people are realizing that that's the pattern or not. But it's pretty much unbroken unless there's a reason that I really need to use a certain color for storytelling purposes. Like if I'm talking about the Lavender Menace, which is a famous lesbian action, they got to have lavender shirts, even though it's the past. The way past. It's all the past at this point. The personal history is becoming more and more historical.
Every day.
Yeah, so that is why the colors are that way.
Okay. I shouldn't assume, but I'm going to assume you work script and then digitally, right? On your...
Well, I'm happy
talk about your work process.
Explode yet another assumption. I do not actually write scripts. I work on my iPad, and I have a custom typeface that is my hand lettering. So that is really critical for working with editors and fact checkers, and something that is going to need to be changed so much. So for the personal sections, because that was more drawing on the memories that I already have, it is a lot easier to put together. I don't have to do archival research for all these visuals. So for those, I would more do a rough sketch and then place these little blocks of text of what people were saying. And then the historical sections, I did it in the other order, but I blocked out little paragraphs and scattered them. I worked on it as spreads also, which in some cases I kind of take advantage of that, having things cross over. I would place these little blocks of text throughout the spreads, and then I would add little sketches of maybe Hazel, the narrator, saying a particular aside, or everything was archivally based as much as I could make it, like based on archival photos where the photographer is known. I got a lot of respect for the movement photographers who were taking pictures of all these protests and actions, because otherwise I would not be able to illustrate this so vividly.
Yeah. It's like,
But that was, more sometimes searching for what the visuals were going to be. I watched a lot of documentaries and took a bajillion screenshots because they have archival footage, or they already went to the effort of pulling photos, just as long as it wasn't searching for something on Pinterest, because I didn't want for anachronisms to creep in there, whatever it may be. And I know that there are aspects of the historical context that maybe I'm not even aware of their significance, but I felt like if I'm rendering something that's actually historical, it just adds that much more richness to it. Those were carefully thought out. And sometimes it was hard to know how to illustrate certain things if they're more abstract, or if there's not a reference material of the particular thing. Yeah, so I just kind of work on everything as thumbnails, quote unquote. It's the size of my iPad screen, but like I'm drawing it really loosely with a pencil like brush, and then I ink it, quote unquote, with a mono weight line that I decided that I like for inking, and then I add these textures and add them at different layers of opacity. But yeah, I've never have really done scripts just on their own, because I come at comics from such a visuals first and a love of drawing first and foremost, and I don't consider the words of it to be my strong suit. So I would almost feel embarrassed to have bare words on the page. I'm like, this is not good enough on its own. I gotta dress it up. But by doing it like that, I do end up having very integrated page layouts. It definitely has a different flow than if I worked on it in a different order.
The thing that boggles my mind is, how did you keep all of this together before it got onto the page? Because it's such a well put together puzzle. How did Little Brown know what you were going to do before? Like what? Yeah. What was the?
Well, maybe if you saw the outline, it wouldn't.
Oh, so there was. I mean,
such a
so there was
puzzle.
an outline.
Yes, there was. I did sell them with a written out description of what the book was going to be and an outline, which I guess I'm more confident in that kind of use of text. It's like writing a resume or something. Yeah. But yeah, the outline was just like description of some kind of incident from my life, and then I switched the font color and description of related historical topic. So from that perspective, it looks pretty simple. And some of them I was a bit more general about, like I didn't really know about the battered women's movement before I started researching, which is an aspect of second wave feminism, the people who started the first women's shelters. I didn't know about all of that history before I started researching it, but I was like, there must be something to historicize the concept of an abusive relationship. So insert that here.
Yeah.
Alternating between historical and personal with a reasonably defined idea of like what the topic would be. But then once I actually started getting in there, then it
blossomed, and
all these nuances become apparent. And that's why
Yeah.
it took so long. Originally, it was like, I could research this in 1 year and draw it in another. But I wanted it to go way beyond the Wikipedia page for each of these topics and
Right.
be bringing in some interesting factoids that might not be obvious
Yeah.
to people.
Yeah, the marrying of the two gives the historical stuff a through line that I am learning / being reminded of things in the order that Hazel is, and it gives shape to what could be a shapeless mass of just facts and figures and all of that stuff. So
Right. Yeah.
yeah.
Thank you. And that interesting thought experiment, like what would the book be if it was just the historical sections? I think then maybe it would seem kind of arbitrary of like
Yeah.
why these topics in this order. And I recapitulate the same years from different perspectives. Like I go over the 20th century like 10 times with different focuses. I guess it's like, here's the history that is most interesting and exciting and meaningful to me. And then by having, the stories of my life, then I guess what it aims to give is give the reader a similar personal connection point, for them to go, oh, here's why Hazel cares about this thing.
In the way that, like, in specificity, there's universality. You're combining the universal and the personal, and even in your subtitle, you put personal in parentheses to sort of allow it to do both things at once.
Yeah, exactly. Because you can read it as a history. When people say a personal history, of course, it's just the personal aspect.
But they both work. And having the personal stuff as the framework for the universal history, it makes it harder to put down the universal history because you start the narrative with Hazel and you invest in Hazel. Once she starts going on this journey and getting this information, the reader, just like her, is like, oh, okay, what's the next thing that's going to go in? Oh, where does this fit into this thing? And it personalizes the history in a way that makes it harder to disconnect from it. Whereas if you had just had, here's the history, boom, 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 and then if you had separated them into like one and the other, it would be difficult for a certain readership to get to the personal from the beginning because you may not have that hook, right? But this book,
book. Oh, that's
this
so
book
great. That's
is
so
like,
great.
okay,
You're
I'm going to
really
give you a
picking up
hook.
what I was putting down. And
Thank God.
Hope that all of your listeners will go out and get it and will feel similarly.
One last question about the book. Was there a particular historical moment or something that you wanted to put in that you couldn't find that Hazel hook to use?
That reminds me of a question that I got at my release event, which was, is there something that I did a deep dive on that didn't make it into the book? I read extensively about the history of Lambda Mu, which is a role-playing game, text-based, which is included in my book because there is a character option for EM-ER pronouns, also known as SPVAC pronouns, which might be known to readers of genderqueer because that's what Maya Kobabe uses. Anyway, Lambda Mu was a point of introduction of SPVAC pronouns into a wider audience and the popularity of non-traditional pronouns on this online game creates an interesting sample. But yeah, I read way more about that than I could fit. There was a fun book called My Tiny Life by Julian Dibble, I want to say his name is. Yeah, I got really immersed in people's exploration of self through these like anonymous online fora. And I do take it as an interesting historical leap, which I do mention, like how much the internet changed how people can explore their genders. Like some would say it's like a leap in consciousness of really emphasizing like a self that is disconnected from place or body or physical appearance.
the freedom that allows is really interesting. Do you see yourself not necessarily doing a sequel, but let's say in 15, 20 years, do you see yourself coming back and giving like a more updated history? Because there was so much, but certainly the next 15 years of your life to have part two or something.
Well, only
It can be
time will
no.
tell.
Yeah.
Only time will
Okay.
tell. I do feel to a certain extent that there's less to tell now that I have figured so much out. I'm not really having the
The
kind
searching.
of relationship drama, which
Oh, well, yeah, that's
is
true.
often conducive to, I mean, it doesn't all have to be as extreme as some of the stuff in
Mhm.
Queer and How We Got Here, but the clean and longing can be generative of stories. But me and my fiance now are really happy together. And at least in our small domestic world, there's not a lot of drama to speak of, but there's always
Well, the larger
different
world
ways that comes into contact with the world outside of our apartment. But yeah, what I'm feeling is that
Mhm.
it would be a real relief to do something that is strictly educational and not personal. Because I'm so glad that it does create this point of connection for people. And, I had a motivation of wanting to get things off my chest and express myself artistically, but it's a lot to deal with, like turning that into entertainment or like
Yeah.
object of discourse and analysis. Yeah, it's a bit too early to say, but
Yeah.
I'm intrigued right now by the idea of using my craft in ways that are less personal. And I don't have the burning motivation to tell more stories about my life right now.
Right.
But we'll
Yeah.
see. It's as I say in the end of the book, recent developments can always cause you to reevaluate history and reframe it in a new way. So, maybe something will go down that will make certain stories seem more significant.
Yeah. Any sort of follow-up can just be a history with maybe a personal epilogue or thing, and then just go into the history because, you make a wide and deep amount of historical information easy to read and easy to get through and understand. So, if we need to drop the personal stuff to get more of that, then personal stuff can be dropped. You've certainly covered that ground.
You'll
We can go
allow
off in this
it.
other direction.
That's
Yeah.
great.
Yeah. I will
Well,
allow it. Yeah.
for now, I'll leave people to just digest this one. But
Yeah. Well,
never
330 some odd pages. It will keep people busy for a while. Where can people find you online? Where's the best place for people to follow you?
You can follow me on Instagram, on Blue Sky, or on Tumblr at Newlevant, just my last name. And it's at H Newlevant for the platform formerly known as Twitter, which just is dying more and more by the day. But if you only have a Twitter account and a zitter, whatever the fuck, and you want to keep up with me, that is an option. And newlevant.com has some of my short comics that people can read for free. And it's got a link to my store if people are interested in buying some of the things that are not Queer and How We Got Here, which will eventually be up there. But for now, I'm letting those sales just go through bookstores.
Fair enough. Hazel, thank you so much for taking your Sunday to come on and talk about this book.
My absolute pleasure. Thank
Yeah.
you so much for thinking so deeply about it and for extolling its virtues. It means a lot.
I mean, you did the work. The least I can do is say, hey, this is worth checking out. Please go and do so. So there you have it, folks. Please do not forget to like, subscribe, rate, and review the show wherever you're given the opportunity to do so, because it really helps us out, and we would super appreciate it. So until we meet again, hopefully soon, my name is Greg. Stay safe, keep enjoying those funny books, and we'll catch you next time.
Thank you for listening. Systems disengaged.